Long ago, in the kingdom of Zubara, there lived a king who could not bear a son. For generations, the throne of Zubara had passed from father to son in an unbroken line. It was the law of the land, older than any man alive. Only a male heir could inherit the throne and keep the royal bloodline seated in power. A king without a son was a king whose lineage would end with him, and King Doru had no son. It was not for lack of trying. It was not because the gods had made him barren. The truth was far older and far darker than anything his people whispered about in the dark. King Doru had no son because, many years before he ever wore the crown, he had done something so terrible that a curse had been laid upon his very blood. To understand it, we have to go back to when Doru was not yet the king, but a proud and arrogant prince. In his youth, Doru was the kind of man that power makes when no one ever tells him no. He was the son of a king and he never let anyone forget it. He was arrogant, cruel, and proud. He treated the common people of the kingdom as though they existed only to serve him, and he looked down on the poor as if they were dirt beneath his sandals. Whatever he wanted, he took, because who would dare refuse the son of a king? One day, the young prince rode out to hunt with his escort of guards. They chased a game deep through the bush, following it all the way down to the banks of the river, at the edge of the kingdom. And there, at the water's edge, the prince saw something that made him forget the hunt entirely. A young maiden. She was about his age, and she was beautiful, more beautiful than anyone he had seen in the palace. The prince abandoned his hunt at once and approached her. He told her to come to the palace that evening to see him, but the maiden politely refused. She explained that she was not from Zubara. She had only come to visit a relative who lived in the kingdom, and she would be leaving to return to her own kingdom that evening. She meant no offense. She simply said no, and the prince was not a man who had ever been told no. Her refusal turned his mood dark in an instant. He advanced on her, and she still refused, standing her ground with a quiet dignity. That only angered him more. In his pride and his fury, the prince did the unforgivable. He ordered his guards to seize her, and while they held her down against her will, he violated her. She begged him, she wept, but he did not stop. When it was over, and the prince turned to leave her broken at the river's edge, the maiden rose to her knees, and through her tears, in a voice that no longer sounded entirely human, she spoke words that would haunt him for the rest of his life. She cursed him. She swore that he would never know peace as long as he lived, that the very thing he had done to her would one day be done to his own firstborn daughter, and that he would never, not once, not ever bear a son to sit upon the throne. The prince laughed at her. He climbed onto his horse and rode away, and by the time he had reached the palace, he had already put her out of his mind. She was no one, a stranger from another kingdom. He forgot her face, he forgot her words, he forgot what he had done, but the curse did not forget him. The years passed, as years do. The old king fell ill, and in that time, he joined his ancestors, leaving the throne to his son. The proud prince married a beautiful maiden of the kingdom, and on the night of the following full moon, he was crowned King Doru of Zubara. His youth and his cruelties were behind him now, buried under the weight of his crown. He had everything he had ever wanted, and then the curse began its slow, patient work. In the first 5 years of his reign, the queen bore him 3 children, all daughters. Doru thought nothing of it. Daughters were a blessing too, and there was still time. A son would come, but the son did not come. 5 more years passed, and the queen bore him 4 more daughters. 7 girls now, and not a single boy. The whispers began in the palace, quiet at first, then louder. A king with no heirs was a kingdom with no future. Doru grew impatient, then angry. He blamed his wife, He told himself the fault was hers, and he took a second wife, certain that the new blood would break the pattern. It did not. The second wife bore him daughters too. Year after year, wife after wife, the same thing happened. Beautiful, healthy daughters, and never once a son. Doru took a third wife. 3 years passed. Still no boy. 18 years into his reign, King Doru had more daughters than he could count on both hands. 3 wives and no heir. And for the first time, a cold fear began to creep into his heart. This was not chance. No man was this unlucky. Something was wrong. Something that no new wife and no amount of trying would ever fix. Something was working against him. He simply could not remember what. And then came the night that broke him. His firstborn daughter, the princess, the eldest of all his children, was attacked, assaulted in the night by someone unknown. Someone who vanished before he could be caught. King Doru flew into rage, unlike anything the palace had ever seen. He sent his warriors into every corner of the kingdom to hunt down the man responsible. Young men were dragged from their homes, arrested and tortured to force confessions. But no confession came, because no one they seized was truly the one. And in the middle of his fury, standing over the ruins of his eldest daughter's dignity, a memory returned to King Doru that he had buried for more than 20 years. A river, a maiden, guards holding her down, his cruelty and her voice raising through her tears. What you have done will be done to your first daughter, and you will never bear a son. The blood drained from his face. He remembered all of it now. The hunt, the water's edge, the young woman from another kingdom who had told him no, the curse he had laughed at and ridden away from. Everything she sworn was coming true, one piece at a time, exactly as she had spoken it. The daughters, the missing son, and now his own child, suffering from the very thing he had inflicted on the maiden all those years ago. Nature was finally paying him back. Shaken to his core, King Doru went in secret to a diviner who lived in the edge of the kingdom. An old seer said to hear voices of the spirit. The diviner cast the cowries, read the signs, and looked up at the king with something close to pity in his eyes. He told Doru what the king already feared in his heart, that long ago he had grievously wronged a woman, that the curse she had laid upon him was no ordinary curse. It was a powerful, ancient, and bond to his very bloodline. It could not be broken by sacrifice, by prayer, or by ritual, the diviner knew. Because the woman who had cursed him was no ordinary woman. She was powerful. She was something far beyond human. And there was only one person in all the world who could ever lift the curse from his line. The woman herself. King Doru left the diviner's hut in silence and walked the long road back to his palace with his head bowed and his heart heavy. After all these years, his sin had a face again, and the only hope for his kingdom, his throne, and his bloodline rested in the hands of one person who had every reason in the world to want him to suffer. But a desperate king does not give up on his throne easily. That very night, King Doru summoned his most trusted warrior and his sharpest, most cunning advisors. He gave them a single command: to search every kingdom, every village, and every road in the land, and to find the woman he had wronged all those years ago at the river's edge. He did not yet know what he would do when they found her. He only knew that somewhere out there, the woman who held the fate of his entire bloodline in her hands had spent the last 20 years becoming something the king could not even imagine. And she had not forgotten him. The king's men rode out of Zubara before the next sunrise. Doru had divided them into 3 groups, sending each in a different direction: north, east, and towards the far rivers of the south. Their orders were simple: search every village, every road, every kingdom. Find the woman the king had wronged at the river's edge all those years ago and return within a single full moon. But a secret this large could not travel quietly. As the king's men moved from village to village, asking their careful questions, the rumor spread ahead of them like fire through dry grass. The great King Doru of Zubara was searching for a woman he had wronged in his youth. The whole land soon knew that the king was looking for someone from his past, and that whoever she was, she held something the king desperately wanted. And when powerful men go looking for something desperately, there are always those who will try to give it to them for a price. A week into the search, the group led by the king's own chief advisor came upon a woman by the name BC. BC matched the description exactly. The right age, the right face, the right bearing. The advisor was certain they had found her, and without wasting a moment, they brought her back to the palace of Zubara. When King Doru laid eyes on her as she entered the great hall, his heart leapt. After all these years, after all desperation, here she was at last. But the woman did not look at him with warmth. She stood before the king and his chiefs with anger burning in her eyes, the anger of someone deeply wronged. The king understood. He rose from his throne and did something no one in that hall had ever seen a king of Zubara do. He apologized, humbly, publicly, before his entire court. He begged her for forgiveness for what he had done to her so many years ago. And then, gently, he asked her to at least tell him her name. The hall felt silent. The woman was silent too, for a long moment. Then she spoke her name and laid out something that shocked everyone present. BC said she would forgive the king, but only on one condition, that he take her as his new wife. She alone, she said, was the one who could bear him the son he had spent his whole life searching for. The king was desperate. A son was everything: his throne, his bloodline, his legacy. He had no room left to bargain, so he agreed. At once, the preparations for the wedding began, and at once, the gossip began too. All across the kingdom, people whispered in disbelief that their proud king would take a stranger, a woman from nowhere, a nobody, and raise her up to be his queen. But the curse was not finished playing its game. Just one day before the wedding, the second group of king's men returned to Zubara, and to shock the entire palace, they too had brought back a woman. She matched the king's description exactly, the same age, the same face, the same bearing as the first. She made the exact same claim that she was the woman the king had wronged, and that she alone could give him a son. King Doru was thrown into confusion. Two women now, identical in every way, each swearing she was the one. He suspended the wedding preparation at once. He did not know what to believe. And then, a few days later, the third group returned. They brought back a third woman, the same features, the same age, the same face. The king remembered from the river, and the same claim, word for word, as the other two. Now there were three strangers, indistinguishable from one another, each standing in the king's hall, swearing that she was the woman from the past, and that she alone held the key to his bloodline. King Doru looked from one to the next, and a cold dread settled over him. He could not tell them apart. He did not know whom to believe. But Doru was not a foolish man. He knew something that the three women did not. He knew that the real woman, the one who had truly been at the river, the one who had truly been wronged, would be able to tell him exactly how it happened. Every detail of that terrible day was burned into the memory of the woman he had hurt. No imposter could know it. So, one by one, he questioned them. He asked each woman to tell him what had happened at the river's edge, and one by one they fumbled. None of them could tell it. None of them knew the truth of that day, because none of them had been there. They were pretenders, women brought forward by ambitious men hoping to win a place beside the king. Or perhaps sent by his enemies to make a fool of him. Every one of them was a lie. In cold fury, King Doru ordered all 3 women locked away, and with them locked away, his last hope seemed to vanish. He was tired, he was frustrated, and after all the searching, all the desperation, all the false hope, he no longer believed that the true woman would ever be found. He no longer believed in anything at all. 2 moons passed, and then, on an ordinary day, when the king had all but given up hope, a woman walked into the palace of Zubara. No warriors had brought her, no advisor had found her. She simply arrived alone and asked to be brought before the king. She introduced herself as Nyari and said that she had heard the cries of King Doru carried on the wind, his desperation, his suffering, his search, and she said that she could lift the curse that had ruined his line. The king barely looked at her face. He was too tired for more false hope. He asked her wearily why she believed she could do what no one else could, when powerful diviners and even goddesses had failed to break the curse that bound him. Nyari answered him quietly. She was the daughter of the water goddess of the great river, and she was the woman he had met at the river's edge all those years ago. The woman whose pride he had taken, whose body he had violated, whose life he had shattered on the day he rode away laughing. The king went cold with shock, but even now, after everything, a thread of doubt remained in him. He had been fooled 3 times already, so he asked her the same question he had exposed the others. He asked her to tell him what had happened on the day, and she told him. Nyari told him that he had been hunting, that he and his guards had chased their game down the water. She told him how he had abandoned the hunt the moment he saw her, how she had refused him, how in his rage at being told no, he had ordered his own guards to hold her down while he took from her the one thing she could never get back. Every word was true, every detail was exact as she spoke. The last of the king's doubt crumbled to dust. This was her. After 20 years, this was truly her. King Doru fell to his knees before the entire court, a king on the ground, before the woman he had wronged, and he had pleaded with her to forgive him. The woman looked down at the broken king for a long moment, and then she accepted. Before the whole court, she lifted the curse from King Doru's bloodline. The weight that had crushed his reign for 18 long years was gone in an instant, and the king wept with relief. But she was not finished. She had one more thing to tell him, and it would leave the entire hall in stunned silence. Nyari told King Doru that she had already had a son, that on that terrible day at the river, she had taken in his seed, that months later, far from Zubara, she had given birth to a boy. The son the king had searched for across 3 wives and 18 years of despair had been alive all along, out in the world somewhere, growing up in hardship and suffering alongside the mother the king had destroyed. Doru's heart overflowed. Grief and joy crashed together inside him all at once. The heir he had prayed for, wept for, torn his kingdom apart searching for, his son existed. His son was real. At once, the king sent his warriors and his most trusted advisors to accompany the woman to travel to wherever the boy was and bring the lost prince home to Zubara at last. Finally, after a lifetime of curse, King Doru was happy, but the story was far from over. A few days later, the king's warriors and guards returned to Zubara with Nyari and with the prince the kingdom never knew existed. His name was Enitan. The whole of Zubara came out to welcome him. After 18 years of a cursed and heirless throne, the people could scarcely believe it. The king had a son at last. King Doru threw a great feast in his honor. and the celebration filled the feast house for 7 straight days and 7 nights. On the 3rd day, before the entire kingdom, the king presented Enitan as the true heir to the throne of Zubara. Doru had never known such happiness. After a lifetime of desperation, he finally had what he had always wanted. 3 full moons later, the king took Nyari as his 4th wife. It was, he believed, the only way to begin making up for the terrible thing he had done to her all those years ago. The crown prince was a young man full of wisdom and humility. He was the eldest of all the king's children, and the whole family came to respect him. People treated him as though he had already become king. But Enitan was nothing like his father had been in his youth. He carried no arrogance. He treated the lowest servants and the highest chief with the same gentle fairness, and he looked upon every person in the kingdom as his equal. Where the old king had once seen the poor as dirt beneath his sandals, he saw only people worth protecting. 2 years passed, and King Doru became convinced at last that the curse had truly been lifted. Then his 3rd wife, the wife he had taken just before Nyari, became pregnant. The king was overjoyed. Surely now another son would come. He pampered her, cared for her, watched over her through every month. But on the day she delivered, the child was a girl. The king was disappointed, but he pushed the worry from his mind. Then Nyari herself became pregnant, and Doru was certain that the daughter of the water goddess would give him a son. When her time came, she too delivered a girl. Now the king was troubled, but Nyari calmed him. She told him not to worry, that everything would be well, that his fate rested in the hands of the gods, and that one day he would have many sons as he could ever wish for. Doru believed her, because now he loved her more than he had ever loved any of his wives. And that was exactly what began to poison the palace from within. The other wives of the king grew silent, and their silence hid a growing anger. They blamed Nyari for everything. In their eyes, she was the reason none of them could give the king a son. The stranger who had walked in from nowhere, taking the king's heart, and left the rest of them in her shadow. They smiled at the crowned prince in daylight and showed him love before the king's eyes. But in the dark of their own quarters, they hated him, and they hated his mother even more. And Nyari, wrapped in the king's devotion, never saw the danger growing around her. 8 years passed since Nyari had first arrived in Zubara. In all those years, more daughters were born, and never once a son. Every wife of the king had tried, every wife had failed, and the pattern that had haunted Doru's whole life seemed to close around him like a slowly tightened rope. 5 years earlier, the crown prince Enitan had taken a wife of his own, the beautiful daughter of one of the kingdom's most respectful chiefs. Within 2 years, she had bore a child, and when the child was delivered, it too was a girl. This shook the king to his core. The fear he had buried came roaring back. The curse was not broken. It had never been broken, but his love for Nyari had grown so deep and so blinding that he could no longer think clearly. He did not question her. He did not suspect her. He simply suffered in silence and told himself it would pass. And then came the day that broke King Doru completely. The palace awoke to a terrible news. The crown prince Enitan was dead. The only heir to the throne of Zubara had been poisoned. No one knew whose hand had done it. No one confessed, but the truth hidden from the king was darker than he could bear to imagine. The other wives of the king had conspired together. Since the curse had robbed them of all the chance to bear a son, they had decided that no one would have what they could not. If they were to remain wives without sons, then Nyari's son would not be allowed to live either. They wanted to equal the misery, and so they took the life of the gentle prince to strike back at his mother. Deep down, the king suspected that his own wives had a hand in it, but grief had hollowed him out, and he no longer knew what to think or whom to trust. One single sin of his youth had reached across an entire lifetime to destroy everything he loved. Piece by piece, the whole kingdom murmured. A heavy silence fell over Zubara, and strangely, the people pitied their king because the cruel, arrogant prince of long ago was gone, and in his place was a humbled old man who had become good and just, far too late to be spared his suffering. Enitan was buried, and Nyari could not hold back her grief. She wept until her voice broke, crying out to her mother, the water goddess, begging her to strike down whoever had murdered her son. As the kingdom drowned in mourning, the king himself fell gravely ill. His heart had simply given up. The pain was more than any man could carry. One evening, he asked to be taken to the palace garden so that he could be alone. He dismissed his guards and sat by himself as the sun set and the darkness crept across the kingdom. And there, in a fading light, a voice spoke from behind him. Do you think you can ever know peace? The king turned. Standing behind him was a stranger, a woman of the same age as Nyari, dressed all in white, holding a staff covered in strange tiny seashells. And the instant Doru looked at her, a cold and terrible sense of familiarity washed over him. He demanded to know who she was. I am the witch, she said. I am your doom. You sought mercy, but mercy you had none of on that day. She told him the truth at last, that she had been playing him all these years, that she had devoted her entire life to a single purpose, to make sure the king suffered through every single day he had left to live. Doru protested that the curse had been lifted, that Nyari had freed him, and the witch only laughed, a strange and hollow sound. She told him that Nyari was nothing but a pawn, an agent she had sent into his palace years ago. Do not turn your anger on her. She knows nothing of what she truly does. I own her mind. The king was staggered, and yet deep in his own heart, in a place beyond all doubt, he knew that this woman was the truth. This was the one he had wronged at the river all those years ago. Not Nyari. It was her. There was not a shred of doubt left in him. He fell to his knees and pleaded for forgiveness. He begged her to end his suffering, told her the pain had become unbearable, swore that he was a changed man now. He knelt in the dirt of his own garden, an old king sobbing before a woman whose life he had shattered in his youth. And the witch took a strange pity on him. I will not forgive you entirely, she said. I will grant you what you desperately wanted. The king answered through his tears that all he had ever wanted was sons, male children to inherit his throne when he was gone. She nodded. She laid her hand upon the king's head and proclaimed, many sons you shall have. Then she turned to leave, and as she walked away, the king called after her, asking whether this meant the curse was finally lifted. No, she replied without turning. Not entirely. Before the king could utter another word, she vanished into the dark. Confused and shaken, Doru signaled for the guards, who helped him back inside. That night, he lay awake for hours, turning the encounter over and over in his mind. And he told no one what he had seen. The full moon passed, the king recovered from his illness, and then the impossible began. Every wife of the king had taken in from his first wife all the way to Nyari, his fourth, all of them pregnant at once. And more shocking still, the widow of the late crown prince Enitan was pregnant as well. The king could not believe what was unfolding around him. Many full moons passed, and then came the time for the children to be born. It was evening when the palace erupted into chaos. Every one of the king's wives went into labor. At the very same moment, their screams echoed together across the whole palace. one voice on top of another, and the king was thrown into confusion and dread. Then, all at once, the same instant, the same breath, every one of them gave birth. And when the king demanded to know the gender of each child, the answer struck him with great terror, greater than any joy. Every single wife had given birth to a son. Nyari bore twin sons. His first wife bore twin sons as well. His second and third wife each bore a son, and the widow of the crown prince, she too bore a son. It should have been the happiest moment of King Doru's life. After a lifetime of curse, his palace overflowed with male heirs in a single night. The king did not rejoice, because in that moment he understood the witch's cruelty completely. She had given him exactly what he had asked for. Many sons, more than he had ever dreamt of, but had left his family in ruins to do it. For deep in his heart, King Doru already knew the truth. These sons would grow, and a throne that had waited a lifetime for a single heir now had more heirs than it could ever hold. His sons would turn on one another, and one day they would destroy themselves in war for the crown that only one of them could wear. The curse had never been lifted. It had only been perfected.